Welcome to the Photo Banter podcast. I'm your host, Alex Gagne, and on today's podcast, I speak with photographer Sam Jones. Sam has worked with clients such as Vanity Fair, Men's Journal, Fortune, and Rolling Stone, to name a few. In this interview, I speak to Sam about growing up skateboarding in California and what led him to pursue a career in photography. I also speak to Sam about his popular Netflix show titled Off Camera, where he sits down with people such as Robert Downey Jr., Jeff Bridges, Cindy Crawford, and Tony Hawk to discuss their careers, lives, and just a lot of different things. It's a really interesting interview show. Been on Netflix for a while. And I also speak to Sam about photographing Bob Dylan for the cover of Rolling Stone. He also worked with Bob Dylan on a little documentary film. Really interesting stuff. Sam's a guy whose work I've been following for a while and been a fan of his show. So I was really interested to get a chance to speak with him about everything he's done. He's kind of dabbled in a lot of different things, photography, his Netflix show, filmmaking. So really interesting guy. So I hope you guys enjoy this one, and thanks so much for listening. All right. Well, Sam Jones, welcome to the podcast, man. Excited to talk to you for a lot of reasons. A fellow skateboarder, photographer. You got a really cool interview conversation show yourself off camera. So I was excited to dive into it. But to start off, I was looking at your Instagram, man. I was jealous. I saw you were recently skating with Christian Hosoi. You guys were skating like the reverse combi. How was that? I hadn't heard about the reverse combi.
It's amazing. It's huge. And, I haven't skated a bowl that big in a long time. So my legs were jelly after like 5 runs because I think it's 13 feet deep. When I was like mid 80s, late 80s, the real combi pool was still there in Upland Skate Park, and that was about a half hour from my house. So we would skate that a lot, and I was in a couple contests in that pool, and it terrified me back then as a kid, and it still terrifies me now. It's just a huge bowl, but it was because of COVID, the whole park was shut down, and because I was working with Christian Hosoi, they let us use the park.
Okay.
So I showed up early so I could have a chance to skate it before anyone got there. And you never get a chance like that. Like I think when that park's open, that pool's filled the whole time, and that it's a much different thing to be able to go and work it yourself without having 90 skaters trying to drop in at the same time. So, yeah. I wish I could go 5 times in a row and get my legs back for something that big, because it was super fun, but it was scary.
Yeah, it's pretty wild now. I started skateboarding in the 90s, and there's just so many more skate parks just kind of like across the country now. Like I live in Massachusetts, and they're building more and more parks. I know going out to LA, it seems like they're popping up new parks like all the time pretty much.
Well, yeah, not LA so much. We still just have a few spots and they're not great, but Orange County and San Diego County, it's like there's a park every block. It's crazy, especially San Diego.
Yeah. Did you grow up skateboarding like pretty early on in your life?
I did. When I started, it was the first wave of skate parks in California. So Concrete Wave, Skatopia, the Big O, Marina, Reseda, and that lasted till I was probably, by the time I was a junior or a senior in high school, every park had closed except Del Mar and Upland. And I started competing in Castle, which is the California Amateur Skateboard League, started by Frank Hawk, Tony's father, and competed in street skating, vert, and freestyle. Actually, everyone kind of did everything back then, and then everything ramps, and had a pretty good ramp in Fullerton, where I was from. Super slippery, but it was for the time, it was really solid and good. And Lester Kasai skated there every day, and Neil Blender, and it was a super, super great scene back then.
Did you have like dreams of becoming like a pro skateboarder, like growing up, or?
Oh, totally. I got sponsored by a shop, which meant I got free boards, and they would, drive us to the contest and give us pizza. But it was funny, even then, because some of my friends were pros. Like one of my best friends growing up was Neil Blender, and
wow,
he was so much better than me and so much naturally better that, I think I knew that I had this limit of how bad I wanted to get hurt, which I didn't have that body commitment level. But yeah, I would entertain dreams of that, and I got pretty good. Like I could do backside ollies out of vert and airs and inverts and that kind of stuff. But then you'd skate with because where I grew up, you just would end up at a session and you'd be at Fallbrook and there'd be Gator or there'd be you know Tony or whatever, and so you'd realize the gap between your ability and the pros.
Yeah, man. I know you've interviewed Tony Hawk before on your show, and that guy. I mean, I've talked about it before. It's like watching that dude in his 50s, like still skate his ramp. It's mind blowing on a weekly basis on his Instagram. Just seeing like what he's still doing at his age. It's insane.
I know it makes no sense watching him skate. It's like he is still, he is still in some ways leading, like he's still inventing new tricks. He's still doing things that nobody else will try across that massive 8-foot channel.
Yeah.
It's terrifying and amazing at the same time. And, funny enough, in the last maybe 3 years, I've become really close with Mike McGill and Steve Caballero because we all ride motocross together,
Mm.
and met Mike through Tony at one of his dinner party things, and we started riding motocross together, and so I still go to parks with those guys, and what they all can do in their 50s is incredible, and it's sort of like a testament um, to if you have a skill, if you have a love, if you have a passion or a discipline that you've worked on, um, the the best thing is to just keep doing it, because if you stop doing it, I mean, it's that stupid cliche of use it or lose it is totally true, because these guys just make skating a part of their weekly lives or motocross riding or whatever, and none of them have real jobs, which makes it easier for them. But like seeing all the things that I used to, spend the majority of my day doing, whether it was playing music or skating or riding motorcycles, um, uh, kids and marriage and all that stuff get in the way, and you lose that stuff. So for me, it's like I'm barely hanging on and trying to not break up my body, but still enjoy it.
Oh, trust me, man. I know. Like I skated a ton. Like obviously, like growing up as a young kid into high school and then kind of into college. But then, yeah, life takes over and you got to figure out how to make money and make a living. And I set up a new complete like during COVID, like over the summer. And I was like, all right, I'm gonna get back out there and get my flat ground back. And it was like, man, it was really from starting from scratch again, man. It was an uphill battle, but still fun for sure.
Yeah,
Um,
the gravity thing is weird too. Like just ollieing up a curb now is so much harder than it used to be,
Yeah, definitely. And I guess in terms of like photography, how did you kind of discover photography? Did you kind of get into that like later after skateboarding, or how did that kind of come into your life?
No, funny enough, it's a story that has its roots in skateboarding as well. Neil Blender got me into photography because he was into it, and uh, he would shoot stuff when he was at the parks or at ramps or at contests, and he did, for GNS and for Transworld. Occasionally, he would do a little story for them and shoot pictures, and so he just was into photography,
Hmm.
and he had a band, and so they'd do their own pictures for that, and so it wasn't until I was a junior at college, um, I went to Cal State Fullerton, and I had been an English major and an art major, and neither of them stuck, and I didn't know what I was doing. And then I took a photography class, and right around that time, I was hanging out with the Blenders a lot, Neil and his brother Brian, and we were riding motorcycles and skating. And Neil lived literally across the street from the college, and there were these great curbs, so we would go skate these curbs in the parking lot of the school. And um, so I took this photography class, and he helped me out. He was like, let me use his camera. He showed me how chromes work. He showed me how you can filter stuff, how a flash off camera can look better than a flash on camera. Like, and as I was doing this, I was also getting interested in photojournalism and kind of studying the history of that, which I liked. I liked the idea of, especially these street photographers like Andre Cortez and Cartier-Bresson, that you could find art in the most ordinary places, which really dovetailed with the skateboarding thing of making kind of your own little scene and just finding, you know, cool moments or cool art, seeing ordinary things in a new way, and that was definitely a skateboarding thing. And then it related to, like, when I saw the pictures of Cartier-Bresson, like even the most famous one of the kid jumping over the still water and he's about to break the water, that looked like a skate photo to me.
Yeah.
You know, it was like, oh yeah, like life is really cool, and with a camera you can capture that feeling. And so, like, I remember the first few assignments I turned in for my first college class were at Fallbrook at the Big Half Pipe, and it's like Jason Jesse and, weirdly enough, Mark Rogowski and Neil, and that's where I learned about shutter drag, and I learned about, you know, shooting chromes at dusk, and how to you had to read your light meter. And so it was sort of like a super fast education.
What did your professors think when you turned in skate photos? Because I remember going to college, and I at that time, like, all I wanted to shoot was skating, and that's all I was shooting. And like some professors like didn't get it. They're like, because they're thinking like traditional route, like teaching you how to like shoot for a newspaper or something. Like, what do you remember about this kind of going to school and like submitting skate photos and stuff, I guess?
Yeah, I mean, the recollections I have were that the photojournalism department at my college was pretty traditional, and the school had a daily newspaper and won all kinds of journalism awards. So what they wanted to see was a giant variety. And I think you know, I don't want to bag on any of those professors because
No.
it got me where I am, but I think that they weren't looking for anything really new. They were looking for the students to be able to turn in things that they deemed traditional for what a photojournalism education would be. So, yeah, the skate photos. I probably stopped turning those in pretty quick. And it was like, well, you know, once you'd done that trick and done the shutter drag, and
Yeah.
I thought it was the coolest thing in the world, but, you know, then it was like, okay, now you got to go down to the fish market and photograph people, you know, an industry of fishermen at 4 a.m. So I wasn't going to turn in skate photos at that point.
Definitely. And I guess once you got out of school, like, did you kind of have an idea of like what you wanted to do with your photography? Like, obviously, looking at your website now, it's a lot of portraiture, and you do entertainment work and a bunch of other stuff. But what was kind of your first step into the photo business, I guess?
Yeah, I mean, I knew what I knew from the school. One of the great things, there were two great things about my school. Number one was I had this one professor named Mark Foster. Excuse me, sorry
No
about that.
worries.
I had this professor named Mark Foster, who was a working LA Times photographer, who actually just retired a few years ago. And he was sort of my first cheerleader, someone who saw in my work something a little more, I don't know, a little different than some of the other students. And so he really encouraged me. And then the fact that there was a daily newspaper that that we had to constantly churn out work for. So by the time I finished college, I had already submitted a few pictures to the Associated Press. Like, our school played in the NC2A basketball tournament. So I ended up making a few pictures that the Associated Press picked up. And so I made, you know, $50 or something like that when they licensed a photo of mine. And so when I left school, the only thing I knew to do was to try to get photojournalism work.
Mhm.
And so I just started out as a stringer, which is a glorified word for, you know, a freelancer at the Associated Press. and and just sort of bullying my way into the job. I would call them when I thought I had something interesting, and drive up there, and submit my stuff. And eventually I got lucky because they saw a whole bunch of my basketball pictures, and they were like, oh, this kid can shoot basketball and make people in focus, which is not, it's not the easiest thing to do. And I had done it a bunch in college, so they gave me an opportunity to go shoot some Lakers games. And
Wow.
uh, and then once I proved that I could be fairly reliable, they started calling me for assignments, and it paid nothing. Like, I remember I once did a stretch of 62 days in a row, doing an assignment every day, and I think I got a check for $700.
Oh my God. uh,
And the check, on the back of the check, it said, endorsee signifies transfer of copyright. So just by endorsing your check, you're giving up your work. An agent would, not
yeah.
be very happy about that
Uh,
practice, but it was great. And so I went into this. I got a loft in downtown LA and just started photographing for the Associated Press. And I think my biggest attribute was I was always available, and I lived like 2 miles from the bureau. So no matter when they called me, I had this roommate who was a chef, and he worked till late at night. He worked at Michel Richard's restaurant called Citrus. So he'd work till like 2 in the morning. Um, and I'm such a deep sleeper, especially back then, that I would never hear the phone. So the photo editor of the Associated Press, developed this whole relationship with my roommate, who would answer the phone and half asleep, write down where I had to be for the day. And and sometimes I'd hear him, and my roommate's name was Scott, and the editor's name was Herb Hemming. And Herb had this funny, funny voice. And, hi, Scott. And Scott would be like, hi, Herb. And then he'd give Scott the assignment for the day. And then I'd go out and I'd photograph a city council meeting, or
wow.
something at the LA Convention Center. And I'd end up at Dodger Stadium that night. And
Yeah, because that's all like pre-email days, right?
oh yeah, it was like, I remember getting, literally coming back to my loft, and there's a piece of paper taped to the refrigerator that says, you have to be at Santa Anita today at 3 to shoot the feature race, the horse race.
It was wild to think, man. Like, I mean, I think back like when I was in high school, that's when we first started getting cell phones and stuff. And it's really, I mean, it's not that long ago, but to think about like how the world operated back then compared to now, where everyone's just instantly reachable via whatever email or Instagram. It's just like it's amazing that stuff got done back there. Everything was just on the phone pretty much.
Yeah, and fun fact, the Associated Press was the first time I used a cell phone.
Okay.
It was probably 1991 or something like that. 1990,
You guys have
1990.
that brick of the
It
old
was a big
Motorola.
brick, and you could check one out if you were going to do something where they thought they might need to reach you. And and the thing I remember about it was it never dropped calls. Like back then, like it was the greatest coverage because there were probably 100 phones in all of LA.
Wow, that's amazing. And like, how do you kind of eventually, you're doing your photojournalism thing with AP and stringing, like how do you kind of start getting into portraiture? What kind of attracted you to that work?
I think two things happen. I was a big fan of portrait artists that were pushing the medium. At that time, it was Annie Leibovitz, and it was Richard Avedon, and some of the more out there images that Vanity Fair and Rolling Stone were commissioning. That for me, again, they were kind of like skate photos, because they were really they celebrated a kind of a weird culture, or they kind of tried to really encapsulate what that person did in portraits. And to me, it was this idea of cinematic portraiture. And what happened was, after a few years of the Associated Press, I was kind of tired of photojournalism. Just in the sense of, most of it wasn't that creative. It was more technical. Like, if you went out and got a picture of the winning touchdown in focus at the Rose Bowl, you were great, but it wasn't really artistic. But occasionally they would send you to a hotel, and you had 15 minutes to photograph Harrison Ford.
Mm.
And it would be one of those days where Harrison is doing press for a new movie. So, they rent a suite at the Four Seasons, and they line up 6 photo shoots in a row, and you go in there and you're like, okay, sit by the window and, you know, put your arm here, and, you know, trying to make a portrait really quickly and trying to make, you know, and at that point, as a photographer, I started looking at portraiture and being like, oh, what can I do with it? And I loved it. And then I got a job being a still photographer on a movie called Bob Roberts, which Tim Robbins wrote and directed and starred in. And he had seen my photojournalism work, and he had known a producer who knew my girlfriend at the time and knew I would be cheap as hell. So he invited me to come out to Pittsburgh and be a unit photographer on that film, and which was great because he had all his friends in it. So there was like 10 known actors that did cameos in that movie. And I just lied to him and said I need to make a portrait for the movie.
Okay.
So I kind of made a portfolio because I was sitting there, I'm looking, and I'm like, there's all these major actors and they're sitting around waiting, which is what everyone does on a film set, and they're doing nothing. And this was before cell phones.
Mm-hmm.
Literally like people sitting and talking and reading books and magazines and shooting the shit. So I would, you know, there's John Cusack and there's James Spader and Susan Sarandon and Gore Vidal, and so I was just like, let's make a picture, and they were like, great, it'll kill some time. And so I did that, and I sort of I glommed onto the DP at the time, a really nice guy named Jean. I'm going to forget his last name, but he was this great handheld DP guy who really knew his lighting and knew how to like make lighting that really felt natural. Like I was so fascinated when he came into a location and he would change all the fluorescent bulbs out and be like, okay, we're ready to shoot, you know,
Wow.
just changing to the right color temperature or looking and going, I think I'd like the light to be coming in through these 3 windows. So he'd light an entire room from outdoors. And I really like went to town on his education, and he would look, I would process my film and show it to him, and he would say, oh, look, I remember specifically when I photographed Gore Vidal, he looked at it and he said, it's great, but you've got the light about a foot too high.
Wow.
See the shadow under his eye. And he's like, if you drop the light down a little bit. And Gore Vidal's sitting there the next week. So I'm like, hey, let's do another shoot. And sure enough, like I got this wonderful opportunity to kind of learn on the job. And after I finished that, I was like, I like portraits so much more. And I think it's because, and obviously off camera is a product of this, but I think I loved the interaction and the collaboration that I got in a portrait, because it almost felt like I was, I don't know, not interviewing them, but having an exchange about art, about craft, about process, and making them a participant in the whatever the scheme was of the day, or the art, or the you know, the caper. Like making them a part of that was really fun, you know. And so when I finished that movie, my thought was I'm gonna become a magazine editorial photographer, and I'm gonna make cinematic portraiture. That was my goal. And I did a few more movies, built up my portfolio a little bit more, but that's the worst work in the world, especially for me. I hated overnight shoots, and you know, being a unit photographer on films is like, you know, you're trying to get a shot in little to no light, and you're always in the way. And
were you shooting like in those old, like back in the day?
Blimp,
what they call it, the blimp, right? It's like so it makes it so people couldn't hear the shutter, right?
Yeah, and one guy made them all. So you'd bring him, you know, at the time a new camera came out. I think it was the Nikon, some 8,000 camera, and you bring the camera to him, and he'll make you the custom blimp, and there's buttons that there's like one was mechanical that had a thing that actually pushed the shutter, and it was so impossible to use and to see and to focus. I remember I did a movie in Chicago, and it was so cold. It was a winter movie, and we were doing a night outdoor scene, and the blimp froze to my face. Jesus. You know, like when a kid lifts a pole, and literally it froze to my face, and I pulled it off and had a scab on my head. That's when I was like, I'm done with this. I'm going to move on to photography that's indoors with people who want me to photograph them.
Yeah.
Or at least in the day, you know. So that, yeah, that I sort of discovered the kind of photography I like by doing every other kind of photography.
No, I think it's important as a photographer just to kind of dabble in a lot of stuff to figure out like what you like, what you're good at. And I would imagine, maybe I'm wrong, but like the times spent working for AP and doing these photojournalism things, do you feel like that experience has kind of even helped like influence the portrait work you do for magazines and stuff now at all?
Oh, for sure. I mean, at the AP, it was kind of a no excuse type of place. It was run at the time by this guy that would have been fired for all kinds of human resource violations. I'm not saying he was a
Yeah, yeah,
sexual
yeah.
harass or anything, but just the abuse that we all took as photographers back then was just sort of normal at that time. To be yelled at and browbeaten and abused in front of your peers was sort of like his style. But what it taught you was when you went out to do an assignment, you could never come back and say, I didn't get it because the person didn't show up, or the weather was bad, or they wouldn't let us into the room, or you had to come back with a picture that was newsworthy. So when I started shooting for magazines, it was a great tool for problem solving. And no matter what the situation was or what the talent was saying they would or wouldn't do, that job helped me to think on my feet and figure out solutions for
Yeah,
sure.
definitely. And
Yeah.
when you're kind of making that transition, like you said, you're going from photojournalism, and then you realize you want to focus in portraiture. Like, who were kind of some of the first like editorial clients you started to work with, and like how are you kind of getting your name out there? Because I think a lot of photographers listening, that's probably something you struggle with. Is like when you're first starting out, no one knows who you are, and you're trying to get your foot in the door somewhere. Like, what was kind of your journey and process with that? I guess.
Yeah. I mean, I do not envy photographers starting out now, because the glut of pictures and of photographers and uh, just the the overwhelming uh, amount of images we all see every day is crazy. And I think the reason I was able to be successful is because I had this sort of willful um, delusion where I really consider myself part of a group of about 12 people who were trying to do what I was doing.
Mm.
Meaning that I would fly myself to New York and hear about somebody who was a friend of a friend who would let me sleep on their couch, and I would go show my portfolio at magazines. Um, and I think if I had any idea how many people were trying to do it, I might have given up. But I just thought I had figured out something that no one else had figured out, which was, all the magazines back then had a portfolio drop-off policy, which is like you drop your portfolio off on Tuesday,
Hmm.
you pick up on Friday. And I remember going into, because my idea was, okay, I'm from out of town. I have one portfolio. I can't drop it off. So I will make my case over the phone to these photo editors. Let me just have 15 minutes. I can't drop off my portfolio, whatever. And I think a lot of people took pity on me, or they decided to be nice, or I was sort of relentless. And but I remember one of my early meetings, I think it was with Jody Peckman at Rolling Stone.
Legend.
He didn't hire me for years after, but I went in and there was a pile of portfolios in the corner. And I'm like, do you have to look through all of those? She goes, I'm supposed to, but I never do.
Oh man, crushing dreams.
And so that was my strategy, is that I would call and call and call, and I would just beg and say, look, and I would say, I'm going to be there for one day, and
Mhm.
I want to meet you and work for you more than anything ever. Can you spare 15 minutes? And I would create these schedules that had no leeway, which would have me like
Running.
running through the city, like thinking I could get a cab or thinking I could get on the subway, and I couldn't. And I'd literally be running through the city, and I would show up like I was wearing terrible clothes, with like a I remember for a while I was kind of wearing I don't know, an untucked shirt with a suit coat over it and a beret. It was the early 90s. It was terrible. And I'm sure I was like sweating like crazy and just kind of lost. And
But you were hustling, so people probably respected that. They're like, this kid's getting after it.
well, and that was sort of I mean, I was aware enough to know that that was that was sort of the deal, that I wanted to let them know two things. Number one, that they hadn't heard the last of me. And number two, I would kind of do anything.
Mm.
And so I just went from meeting to meeting, and I finally got a job. My first job ever for a magazine was for Entertainment Weekly. And they called me, and, instantly in your head, you're like picturing this great job. And then I find out, they tell me the job is to photograph a parking space.
Seriously?
Yeah, I think it was, I'm trying to remember. It might have been Roseanne Barr's parking space. It was somebody's parking space who apparently there was some feud over someone had parked in her space and she'd thrown a fit, and Entertainment Weekly thought it'd be great to photograph this have a photo of the parking space. So they sent me out, and I treated it like it was the cover of Rolling Stone. Like,
Yeah.
I shot it from all different angles. I set up like a strobe with a filter on it to make it more mysterious. I got a security guard and I said, "Hey, walk through my photo so it looks like you're patrolling the space." And I think I sent him like 20 proof sheet or 20 rolls of chromes for this parking space. And it ran this big in the back of the magazine. But then I don't know, like a month later, they called me again and they gave me a small portrait. And that was the beginning.
Wow.
And I think it was kind of like, I think they must've seen that. And they were like, "This guy's crazy. He wants to work so bad. He sent us 20 rolls on a parking space." And I
Holy
think
shit.
that made a huge difference. I think not having an ego and not thinking I belonged and not thinking they were ever going to hire me again made me, I mean, it was sort of like the first time I really understood my own personality, which was like, I've got to prove myself. And I don't think that's ever changed. I
Yeah,
still feel like every time I do anything, I have to prove myself all over again.
definitely.
You know?
And did it kind of take you a while to find your voice as a photographer? And like, how do you kind of describe your approach to portraiture, I guess, these days? And has it changed much over the course of your career, you think?
It took me forever. And I think finding a voice or a style is something that, like, if you're honest about it, you don't make it up. You don't design it. You sort of come to it by realizing that this is the only kind of work you can do. And I remember back when I was starting to work a lot, there was this photographer named Chip Simons, and he was getting a ton of work because he was shooting everything with a fisheye lens and putting like 3 different gel lights. And you'd see it and be like, "Whoa, that guy's like super amazing." He's transforming a regular office building portrait into this weird, cool thing. But the truth was, it was a gimmick, and he probably had a shit ton of work for 2 years, and then
Dried up.
that's it. And then, like, Peggy Sirota, like, you could always tell her photographs. It was like turning adults into children. And that was super, she got a ton of work for that and was a really good photographer anyway. So she was able to transform out of that. But point being, like, I would look at that stuff and go, I'm never going to get that traction because I don't have a signature style. I don't have a thing I'm doing. And it took me a long time to realize that my style was subject driven. So, and again, this harkens forward to off camera. I think that my my interest as a photographer was in listening to the person and trying to bring something out about their personality.
Yeah.
And in college, I was an editorial cartoonist, and then I worked for the Associated Press. So I got really adept at trying to figure out how one frame could tell a whole story. And so if you look at my portraits at the height of my magazine stuff, like the Steve Martin and the banana peels, or Chris Rock with the fire hose, or even the Martin short with all the cats, they're like editorial one panel cartoons, like the New Yorker cartoons with the captions, where I was really trying to pull a specific aspect of that person's personality out and make a whole story about it that all fit in one frame. And that became my style. But I wouldn't even call it a style. I would call it just, I guess I'm editorializing on who I think that person is. And I think as I got better as a photographer, I got more nuanced with that. to where I could eventually do it with a black and white portrait that didn't even have any props or set or location or anything. And it was about listening to the subject. And so it took a long time for me to seem like I had a style, I think, because I was really honing my ability to listen and see who the person was.
I really like the stuff. I really enjoy your work is like it's like timeless. Like a lot of the portraits, they're it's just really good light, good composition. Like I go back to like someone like Avedon, like his stuff is this. I would say there's not like so much sauce. Like the guy you were talking about before who's shooting fisheye and all these crazy lights. It's like tons of sauce. But like the stuff I really enjoy, it's like good light and good composition is always going to be good, and you don't need all the tricks and stuff to go on top of it. You know.
Yeah, I think one thing I discovered was that I also wasn't totally in control of when it was going to be a good photograph or not. And so much of that had to do with the subject and who they were. And, some people are eminently photographable. And if you just get your own stuff out of the way, you get the sauce out of the way, as you're saying,
Yeah.
um, and just sort of pay attention, you're going to make a good photograph. And other times it's like either you don't connect with that person or that person is just not, their skill lies in another area. And it's that's where you have to lean on your experience to make an interesting photograph. But that was an interesting discovery for me. And it wasn't it didn't just apply to photography. It applied to filmmaking. It applied to my show. It applied to all kinds of pursuits, which is that there's only so much you can control. And the rest is sort of like, good fortune and good chemistry and the day, and so I think for a long time I missed out on that because I did want to have so much of a plan, that brain of I have to produce something great, wouldn't let me get out of the way. And funny enough, off camera, my TV show helped me a lot with that because I didn't have the time to do a regular photo shoot with any of these people. I wanted to spend most of my time with them, talking to them.
Mm-hmm.
So at the end, it was like, God, we only have 15 minutes left to do this photograph. And it made me such a good photographer because it made me throw out every possibility and focus on the thing I knew I could do. And it's sort of a great thing to discover that you can just have a camera and go into a room and find something, or say something.
Definitely. And yeah, your show off camera, which I've been watching for years. What kind of prompted you to start that? And like, was there any ever hesitation of like, because you're trying to do photography and then you're doing this? Do you ever worry about like people thinking you're not doing photography anymore? Or what's kind of been your journey with off camera?
I made peace a long time ago with the fact that I am like a multi-hyphenate person, and those people have a hard time
Mm-hmm.
because the, you know, um,
I ask for myself, honestly. It's something I worry about too, because like I'm a photographer, but then I'm doing this too, you know?
yeah, no, I think that there's in all fields, you have actors like this. You have Zach Braff, who he's an actor and he's a writer and he's a director. And I think he's like the best thing he is a director,
Mm-hmm.
but that's kind of the hardest work for him to get because we'll see him as an actor. And I think that I realized way early on that I was going to be somebody that was never going to be satisfied doing one thing. For me, the biggest joy is in the coming up of the discovery process. So to be honest, the period of photography I enjoyed the most was when I was totally hustling and scrambling. And when I made a picture, it looked to me like something I didn't know I could do, or it looked like somebody else's work that I admired, or an happy accident occurred. That was the greatest. It's way less fun to know how to do something and go do it. Like, it certainly looks good in the room. You can walk in and you make a picture and people look at it and like, wow. But it's way more fun to have that wow feeling yourself,
Definitely.
And I remember right around the time that I decided to do the Wilco movie, that was the first time I realized, like, oh yeah, like I want to have that same excitement about the medium of documentary film. I think I can make a documentary. I like watching these things, let me try to do it. And right around that time too, I also had this weird little radio show that I did. I had a house, a little cabin up in the woods about 2 hours outside of LA, and they had a weird little gas station, pizza place, video rental all in one.
Wow.
And the guy put up an amateur antenna, and he had like a 200 CD changer. He put his collection of bad CDs in it, and he would broadcast it, and that was the radio station up there. And because it was like a bowl of mountains, it's the only thing you could hear on the radio. So all 1,500 people that lived up there could only get this station.
And you were just kind of doing that for fun, that's going in like during the week?
Yeah, so I had a music studio, and I was like, oh, I want to be a radio host. That'd be funny. And so I asked the guy if I could like give him a couple CDs to play every Saturday night between 6 and 8. And he said yes. And so I would, in my studio in Santa Monica, I would make a radio show, and I would interview my friends. And, like I interviewed a couple guys from Wilco, and I interviewed a couple other musicians that I knew. And I'd play music, and I had a fake, persona and everything. And it was just a blast for me, and I loved it. And I found myself like doing that work instead of the work I was supposed to be doing, because it was so much fun.
Yeah.
I think I realized something then, like, oh yeah, like I'm always going to be trying to do the thing that feels more like a hobby than the thing that feels like work. So then I think I kind of realized then that that's what was going to happen to me, that I was going to keep pursuing things that seemed, fun. And off camera was the exact same thing. I was like, because I loved podcasts at the time. When I started off camera, I loved This American Life. And it was pretty early on in the podcast thing. Mark Maron was doing it.
Yeah, because you've been doing what off camera for like 8 or 9 years now?
I started in 2013.
Okay,
so
yeah.
It's not that podcasts weren't out there, but there was, it wasn't like it is now by any
Definitely. Like even within the last 2 years, like, I mean, I started mine like 3.5 years ago. And from then to now, I see so many more people getting into it, which is cool because there's a lot of cool content out there. But yeah, it has changed a lot.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's a funny thing because I remember the original conversation took place with another documentary filmmaker. And look, I've had a pretty full documentary career already. And a lot of the commercials I directed had a documentary feel to them, because that's the kind of work I got after making a few films. So I've done a ton of interviewing, like a ton that people have never seen because it's for commercials or because it's, for weird projects or whatever, and had a lot of experience at it. So I was talking to my friend, Chris Wilcha, who's a commercial director, but he also directed a season of This American Life when it was on television. And he's, made docs as well. And he was like, what about podcasts? Do you like podcasts? Did you listen to podcasts? He was really interested in podcasts.
Yeah.
At the time I was doing this book project, and I hired him to do the interview of myself and this musician. We were doing this book, and we started talking about it. And I was like, well, if I was going to do a podcast, I'd film it, just because why not? And then if I was going to do that, I'd probably photograph the person, because they're there anyway. And that'd be a cool way to, to sort of, make a visual presence around the podcast. And he's like, yeah, you should do that. So it was sort of like this weird, what would my version of a podcast look like? And it was totally experimental. Like, it didn't start out as a show. It started out as a website where you could read it, watch it, or listen to it. Like, we also met a magazine. So we transcribed the whole interview, the photographs in the magazine. There was a magazine cover, and you could watch it, you could listen to it, you could read it. And that was my thing. And crazy enough, the first attention it got were from these guys that worked, I think, at FX, who wanted to like license the software of the platform I'd created for, like, when they release a movie, like you could have this thing where you could watch it, listen to it, or read it. And it was this, at the time, and again, no one knew where to put it. It wasn't a podcast. It wasn't a TV show. It wasn't really a magazine. It was like really hard to book guests, because they were like, well, what is it?
Yeah.
Like we get emails from publicists saying, we'd like our person to appear on the cover of your magazine. And could you come to his house? And we're like, no, we film him in Santa Monica, like,
Yeah.
and again, I made it 10 times harder for myself because it was this undefined thing. But after I think about 11 of them or 13 of them, an editor friend of mine who was working at DirecTV showed it to the bosses over at the Audience Network, the head of these two guys that were running this sort of Wild West channel called the Audience Network, which came for free on every DirecTV box.
Hmm.
And they were like, we'll buy your shows and we'll air them and we'll make you a contract to make more. And it was shocking.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden it was a real thing with real agents involved and a contract and all that stuff. And I went all in. I got a new building because we were shooting them and it wasn't soundproof. So you could in the early episodes, like the first Robert Downey episode, if you listen carefully, you can hear the FedEx truck backing up in the alley outside, and you could see the light changing on him.
Yeah.
He had skylights, and so we built a studio, rented a new building, and built a studio to do it, and kind of went all in, which was a bold move because they only gave us a 1-year contract. And kind of my old hustling days, I was like,
go their gut.
Hey, at the end of that 1 year, they're gonna up us again. And then I called in every favor I had for every famous person I knew and begged them to come do it. Like Matt Damon was our first guest in the new studio, and I begged him to come do it. And we were so not ready to shoot yet on the day he was available that the electrical panel wasn't done, and the power went out 4 different times during the taping. And poor Matt just had to sit there in total darkness while we had called an electrician and got him out. It took like 4 hours to get out. You know what I mean? But I was like, you know what? I'm gonna if you look at the first episodes 14 through 32, and you look at the names we had there, or 11 through 32, you're like, oh yeah, it was all crazy A-list, and it worked. And then they upped the number of episodes, and they gave us a new contract. And
because now it lives on Netflix, and then you still have a website, and I saw on your website there's some type of subscription model, and then it's also on Spotify and all those platforms. Where does it primarily live now, I guess?
Well, so we've been on hiatus since the pandemic started. So we've been, the podcast, we've been rerunning our old, picking our favorite episodes and running them.
Yep.
And the Audience Network went away. So the TV show element went away. And I had to make a decision at the beginning of last year whether or not to pursue another network, find another home for it. And I decided I was going to let it live just online for a while and see what I wanted to do for this year, because I'd done 219 of them. And so as it stands right now, I still don't know if I'm going to bring it back in the same form or do something different. But I've started 3 films during the pandemic.
Damn, man, you really get after it, Sam.
Well, I just, I think after doing so many of them, that same feeling set in, which is I know how to do this, but I would like to try something else. And this pandemic's been actually great for that, because it's allowed me to sit here without a bunch of, upcoming work to focus on things I want to do. Because I think, you run into this thing a little bit. I think everyone runs into this when they have any kind of success at all, which is there can be just enough work dangling out there that it's, when you're someone like me, I didn't grow up with money, and I didn't grow up with any kind of idea that I'd be successful. So when someone calls and says, hey, there's this job and it pays this much, I have a very hard time turning those things down. And what happens is you can, it's kind of the tail wagging the dog. You can end up being in a place where you're not really doing the work you want to do, but who are you to turn something down that's that's allows you to be an artist and is lucrative, and they treat you really nicely. And so this pandemic's been interesting to be able to actually have some headspace to think about what I want to do next.
What do you think it is? Are you still interested in photography and editorial and all that stuff, or what's kind of got you interested right now?
Well, I'd say I'm interested in all of it, but I'm making I'm making 2 documentaries right now that are in 2 different stages of completion. One we're still in production on, and one is we're kind of, we're getting to the end of the edit process. And then I've got some TV projects that'll hopefully start up when the pandemic's over. I'm not someone who wants to go work under COVID conditions if I don't have to. I have many friends that are out filming things right now, and it's
tough.
It's tough. And not only is it tough, but like I did a few commercials through the pandemic, and we did one that was, it was all outdoors. There was a lot of motorcycle footage, and even the indoor stuff was done, in a way that it was remote, except for the people that had to be indoors. But it sucked. Like wearing masks the whole time. No one can see your face or hear what you're saying. You're trying to direct off a monitor, and it takes 5 minutes just to get the prop person to move the vase into the right place, because you're trying to do it over the walkie-talkie. And so I think hanging over all of that is the danger that maybe you're creating an environment where someone could get sick. And
I know it's happened to 2 of my friends in the last month. They were on productions because they're traveling on different like ad campaign things, and it just kind of happens. It's like a numbers game at some point. Like if you're out there,
for sure. And I've got friends I got a friend who's making a film right now. A very, very big budget film, and they're taking every precaution and following every rule. And if anyone is safe, it's them, and they'll probably get through it just fine, just like the sports teams are.
Yep.
But it's it's a tough way to work. And so for me, I'm taking the time to kind of almost to bring things back to more of a do-it-yourself place. Like this one documentary I'm working on, it started out pre-pandemic, and so we were able to shoot a lot of it in person. And then when COVID hit, we've developed all these different ways to keep going. Like,
all right,
ship cameras to the main subject, and literally taught the subject of my film how to use a Red camera over massively long Zoom sessions.
Get that white balance right.
I mean, audio and going in and changing the frame rate and the compression and all that stuff, and with varying levels of success. Like certainly some failures and some things.
They're gonna get a DP credit at the end of the film.
Probably, yeah. It's finding different ways to do it. Like we did an interview in Portland last month, and found a location that was ventilated, and sent 2 people in and created a way to mount a big monitor right where my head would be next to camera. And we did it over Zoom. And so it's like, and you have to be kind to yourself that it's not exactly the way you would have done it, but it is these times. And the important thing is that we're doing it in a way that where no one's, in danger and stuff like that. So that's been really interesting to go from a full staff in a big building and everyone's got their jobs to working this out. I mean, even the editing has been crazy. Like I know this gets a little inside baseball, but the editor and I have 2 identical drives that get updated every day by over WeTransfer.
Yep.
And I've had to learn editing software that I didn't think, Avid and Premiere stuff, I didn't think I'd ever have to know, so that we can work and we can do it safely. And that's been a total education. But I kind of feel like my life prepared me for it a little bit, I was a one-man band for so long that this has been an interesting time for sure.
Definitely. And I had to ask about one shoot before we wrap up. You got to photograph Bob Dylan for the cover of Rolling Stone, man. That's just insane, because that guy doesn't do a lot of shoots, I think, and is such a iconic, legendary musician. How was your experience getting to work with Bob Dylan?
Well, yeah, I got to do it twice.
Oh, I didn't realize that.
Covers, which is shocking, because the first one, and the backstory on this is Bob Dylan growing up was my favorite artist. And I've I really got into Bob Dylan and high school. A friend of mine got me into it, and I just always I was always there and loved him so much. And so when I got the call from Rolling Stone, it was I think 2008 or 2009, and the shoot was on my birthday, and it was
Wow.
in Paris.
Wow.
And it was like, hey, can you fly to Paris and photograph Bob Dylan on your, your birthday? And and it it felt, it was one of the few times in my career. The other time was when I got called for my first Vanity Fair cover, because that was always the thing. I was like, oh, when I do one of those, I'll know I've made it. And I didn't get one for so long that I passed that. Like, I was like, oh, I'm just never going to get one because
Yeah.
Annie does all of them and Mark Seliger does the ones that she doesn't. And then I'm never going to get one,
Yeah.
And when it finally happened, it was almost anticlimactic. But when Rolling Stone called me to photograph Bob Dylan, I had just a little exhale of like, oh, I made it.
Yeah.
I made it,
Yeah, it's like where's my life right now? I'm flying to Paris to shoot Bob Dylan. Doesn't get any more gangster than that, man.
it was, it was great. And it was interesting because that shoot developed a rapport and a relationship with him that led to not only the next shoot, but also a documentary I made about him. And it started out with, I found this amazing location, this empty apartment in the 8th that was that felt like it hadn't changed since the 20s. It was just this empty, beautiful bones of an apartment, and it was a walk up. And I showed his publicist the day before, and he's like, Bob's not going to walk up four giant flights of stairs. And I said, yes, come on. And I knew enough to know that he has a gym, he boxes. I'm like, yes, this is the spot. And I think part of that feeling of I've made it gave me the courage to tell this person, like, yeah, this is where we're doing it.
Yeah.
Talk Bob into it. That's your job. And I'd never really been that way, but I felt so sure about this location. It just felt like the right place to do it. And sure enough, he came up and he brought his guitar, and I decided to do the shoot that I'd want to do with him, not the shoot that I felt like I had to do or the one he'd agreed to. And so I was just like, I'm just going to do what I want to do. So I said, I'd like to photograph you playing music. So I said, okay. And he pulls his guitar out and starts singing and playing for me. And I'd like to, this and that. And I don't think it's the greatest shoot of my life, but I look at those pictures and they're some of my favorite pictures I've ever taken because they were true to what I love about photography, what I love about him, and what I love about, the world, what I'm into. And so that was the greatest thing. And I got called 2 years later to photograph him again in Bilbao, Spain, for another cover of Rolling Stone.
Was that the one where he's got the hat and the like black jacket? And
yeah, and that time he was totally on board. And I found like he gave us like a 12-hour photo shoot. And
12 hours?
Yeah, I found all these locations all around Spain. I think we started at like 9 in the morning, and I was at his hotel room. I think I was at his hotel room looking at pictures with him at 11 that night. It was the longest day. We did the train station. We did a gentleman's club that had billiards and a weird solarium, and we did this thing on a street, like a cobblestone street around the public. It was crazy the amount of trust he put into me, and it was just the strangest thing start to finish. Like I went to his hotel room the night before and met with him to talk about what we were going to do, and ended up interviewing him for 3 hours about Blonde on Blonde.
Wow.
Which
is that interview, or was that for your documentary, or is that somewhere else?
No, it was just he just started talking about it, and I started asking him questions. I think what he was doing was practicing for the interview he was going to give the next day with the next week with the Rolling Stone writer.
Wow.
And I think he was practicing on me, and I knew that whole history so much, and I just kept asking him things. He told me this story about how when he was recording Blonde on Blonde in, where was it? It was in the South, not at Muscle Shoals. It was in Nashville. And I think it was at RCA Studio A, and he was walking around. He had long hair at a time when no one had long hair, and someone threw a full can of Coke out a car window and hit him in the head.
Fuck.
Yelled hippie at him, and he, down on the ground. And And the weirdest thing is when I walked into his hotel room, he was in his pajamas watching the Polar Express. No joke. I
You
come
just
in, hey Sam, have you seen this movie? It's a great movie. Technology in this movie. I mean,
yeah. That's
wow,
that's
and there he is and watching. There's Bob Dylan in Spain watching the Polar Express on the hotel TV, and it was a crazy experience. And then I got the call to make a documentary about his basement tapes like 2 years after that.
what's that documentary called? I didn't realize you
Called
made
Lost Songs.
Lost Songs.
Lost Songs, the basement tapes continued. And I think it's still on the Showtime Anytime app. It aired on Showtime in I think 2016. And it was a film. Bob's archivist had found a bunch of lyrics that had never been set to music in a box and asked Bob what they were. And he said, "Oh, I wrote those in Big Pink in 1967." And so T-Bone Burnett and myself and Bob Dylan put together a band that that took those lyrics and made them into music, and we filmed that whole recording process.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah, so that whole arc with Bob was so unexpected and so exciting, and I got to do the same thing with Tom Petty, and some of my real musical, you know, uh, heroes that I hate to use the word heroes, more like what's the word? Signposts, guideposts, talisman. I don't
Yeah.
know, but people that have influenced you and had an influence on the way you look at the world. And I lived long enough, and they lived long enough to be able to work with them, and those things are why I, probably became a photographer in the first place. Because as a photographer, you want to be around the people that interest you, excite you, raise your curiosity, and collaborate with them. You
Yeah.
know,
I just find musicians just really interesting. For me, when I look at all the art forms, like obviously I love photography, I love films, but I feel like when I think about it, like music is like the most impactful art form there is. Like it motivates you. You listen to it for whatever different moods you're in. When you look at films, like the music choice, this affects the film on so many different levels. Like I think for me, like music is just like the most impactful. I don't play any music, but anytime I get to photograph a musician or this, like, I just think musicians are just incredible, you know?
yeah, yeah. I think that especially at a certain time in life when you were trying to make your own way in the world, and you find artists that sort of make you feel like you're not alone in the way you see the world.
Hmm.
It's pretty powerful. And I think the fact that music, you can make a soundtrack to your own life, and in a movie, a song is being used to manipulate your emotion,
Yep.
which is very powerful and good and artistic, and I love that more than anything. But you can also, I just remember taking mute, I lived under headphones, for all of my travels, and seeing a place for the first time while listening to something is, yeah, I would agree with you. I think it's super impactful.
And I guess just to wrap up, my last question for anybody listening, like you've had a really interesting career thus far, like done a lot of different creative pursuits, be it photography, filmmaking, your show off camera. Like, what advice would you give to people listening that are interested in pursuing a career in the arts or creativity? What kind of your lasting words for them, I guess?
Oh gosh, I think I do think if you're creative and you're meant to be an artist or a creator, um, you're gonna do it because you like it. I
Yep.
think if you don't like it, you're probably not in the right place. Like if you're trying to be a photographer because you think that'd be a cool life, or you think that somehow you've been disillusioned to think that you'll make a bunch of money, um, that's not the right pursuit. I do think that if the true test of if you are going to have a creative life and if you're a creative person um, is is the impulse to make things regular and because it feels good while doing it. I mean, one thing I know about me is that the most enjoyment I get comes from the actual making of the thing. Like I enjoy making a film so much more than I enjoy showing it to people, or having them tell me they liked it or watching it at the end. The discovery process and the making of things. I mean, for instance, I sometimes do these little wood carvings, these Japanese woodblock printing, and I just started doing it because I saw it and I thought it'd be interesting. And uh, I think I enjoy making it more than I enjoy the results. Just the sitting there, the carving out of the wood, and there's something where time goes away for me while I'm making something, and though that's maybe that's I mean, it's probably a really Buddhist, really basic principle of Buddhism or Zen, but the idea that you can be totally in the present because you're engaged in making something. It's the same reason I like riding motorcycles, because when I'm doing it, I can't think about anything else, because if I did, I'd crash. So you get in this state where you're completely in the present and there's no judgment on you and there's no worry about the future. There's no regretting anything you did in the past. You're just right there. And it's hard for me personally to find those moments unless I'm doing something like making something, or, you know, and I hate the judgment part of it. I hate the selling part of it, all that.
Yeah.
But all those things are part of it. So I would just say to anyone out there, if you love it, then every day it'll be your education, it'll be your dessert, it'll
Yeah.
be your pastime, and try to separate those things from the end result or the success. Like try not to soil the good feeling of making something by having it have to, pay off in some other way, or be judged by somebody else.
Personal satisfaction.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, we're in a weird place in the world where everything is out there, and every, Instagram and all those things are great work stares you in the face every time you pick up your phone, and it feels like a dime a dozen.
Yeah,
And
man. Yeah, that's facts.
I think
Well,
it's hard. I think it's really hard now. I feel very lucky to come up in a time um, where seeing a great photograph was not an everyday occurrence, and when you saw one, it like sustained you and got you excited. There was never any danger of a sensory overload
yeah.
of creativity.
Yeah. Well, Sam, man, I can't thank you enough. It was a real pleasure talking to you. Like I said, I've been listening and watching off camera for years, so it was a real pleasure to get to talk to you, and I can't thank you enough, man.
Oh, I appreciate that. Thanks for your good questions.
So there you have it. That was the Sam Jones interview. Just want to thank Sam so much for taking the time to come on the podcast. It was real interesting talking to him about everything he's done within his career. Like I said, he's done a lot within filmmaking, photography, his Netflix show. Just a really creative guy. So can't thank him enough. Definitely go check out Sam's work. His website is samjonespictures.com. As well as on Instagram, you can follow him at Sam Jones Pictures. I'll put the link in the description, but you can find all his stuff right there. And as always, I'll be having weekly podcasts every week on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and the Photo Banter YouTube page. So definitely go check us out on YouTube. Hit the subscribe button, as it'd be much appreciated. And yeah, thanks so much for listening, and take care.